Welcome to UpWell The Podcast. I'm Sarah, and this is my beautiful co-host, Katie. As fellow female entrepreneurs turned friends and now business partners, we are so happy you're here.
With every episode, it is our sole purpose to share authentic conversations to inspire your personal level up. Take our curiosity, add your best intentions, and flow with us in the UpWell.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of UpWell The Podcast. I'm Sarah. This is Katie. You know us by now. Hopefully you've been tuning in for the past few weeks, and we're glad to be back.
Yeah, welcome.
Welcome to the new studio. If you haven't noticed, maybe you saw in last week's episode that it looked a little different behind us. So we are slowly but surely making this our new home.
Our new home, yeah. Little by little, week by week, you'll probably notice some changes. So just kind of tune in for that, the progression of our new studio space.
It'll be like, Where's Waldo? Like each week you can pick out the new piece of decor.
I like it.
Ooh, there's a new plant.
Ooh, there's a new sign. New chairs. I really want new chairs.
No, that is next on our list. So we'll get there though, as we grow,
Yeah.
Well, it is the last week of March, I think, when this is airing. So March Madness is upon us.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're not really going to talk about basketball though. We're going to talk about the art of saying no.
Yeah.
In the madness. And I think we'll circle back to this, but I think so many times we get overwhelmed with the season or the holiday season. And when we step out of that, we kind of come up for air and hope that it slows down, and it doesn't. So I'm excited to kind of dive into saying no and protecting our energy.
Yeah, setting that boundary, setting that line of what works and what doesn't.
Definitely. So tell me, just in your thoughts, if you had to describe what a boundary is or break down what a boundary actually is for someone that may not know, what is it to you?
So a boundary to me is that kind of that stop sign where you're coming up to something and you're just like, whoa, nope. Your insides feel weird. You get kind of just, you feel funky. It's not meshing well with your energy and your inner line of being. And it's that stopping point to where you're just like, oh no, if I, step over that line, and don't get me wrong, I am a habitual line stepper, but there is an internal, I think, force field within me that I know as my boundary, my limit to what I can allow into my space and what I can allow myself into as well, which I think is a good thing to remember as well. It's not always what you let in, it's what you are stepping into as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people associate boundaries with people and relationships, but it can also be situations. It can be a new job. It can be a new environment. It can be, being invited somewhere that you may not feel aligned with, whether that is the people that are there or, the timing. Maybe you're tired,
Right.
So I think just being able to use your intuition, like you were saying, and being energetically in tune with yourself and what you need out of any situation is super important.
Yeah, and I think I like something that you said, the timing of it. There is a phrase called SALT, which is sleepy, angry, lonely, or tired.
Yeah, I think that's right.
No, it's not tired. There's hungry in there too, but I forget what it is. But there's an acronym. I'll have to see if I can think of that as the show goes on. But if you're any of those emotions, like having that self-awareness to know, like, okay, this isn't going to work right now because I am one of these 5 things, or maybe tired might be my thing that I am adding in there because I know when I'm tired, I'm a bear to be around.
Definitely. So. And I'm like that when I'm hungry. So everybody has kind of their thing, I think.
Yes. You were just telling me earlier today when you're thirsty.
Yeah. If I'm uncaffeinated or dehydrated, beware. Beware.
But yeah, no, I think that there is that self-awareness of knowing what works for you and what doesn't. But in the same sense, you have to try new things. But even when you try something new and you're like, okay, I'm feeling this out, but there's that spidey sense inside of you that's just telling you, no, this doesn't work for me. And it's that intuition that I think learning to listen to that is your rule keeper. That is your boundary kind of crossing guard in a sense.
Yeah, and I think we tune out our intuition a lot because, especially as women, and don't get me wrong, men probably experience this too, but I think we're expected to say yes a lot, especially from a young age. Like, if you want to get ahead, you have to say yes. Mm-hmm. That can be in school, that can be in sports, that could be at your job. And I think it becomes so hardwired in us that we can't say no. And then when we need to desperately to protect our own peace, to protect our energy, just to feel our best and create that boundary in our own lives of what we can and cannot take on or be a part of, I think we just have a tendency to power through it and grimace and just go with it because we've always been expected to say yes.
And I think we're expected to say yes that's more of an ancestral pull, because women by nature are more nurturing. So the need to nurture and take care of things, oftentimes we then extend ourselves too much to where we aren't then in turn taking care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's breaking an internal boundary that you have. You're breaking that like work life, or in my eyes, kind of that work and peace balance that you have within yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, that's how you fill up your cup, right? Is maintaining your energy balance or having a sense of peace. And if you're constantly saying yes and just pouring of yourself, giving your energy away, there's nothing left for you at the end of the day. So I do want to talk about, though, because I feel like there's different types of boundaries, because it's a buzzword right now. Everyone's talking about boundaries. Everyone's talking about how to create boundaries and what they look like. But I think there's different types of boundaries. I think you can have boundaries in relationships, with people. And I think that you can have energetic boundaries with things that you decide to let in or step into. So let's talk about boundaries with people first, because I think those are the hardest ones to set, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a learned behavior as well. It's a conditioned response to how you were raised, how you were treated as a kid, whether that was by your parents, in school, by your friends, by your siblings, you name it. So I think that is very much a conditioned thing. So setting boundaries with other people, especially people that are very close to you, is one of the hardest things to do.
Agreed. And I think if I were to express how to do this, I think that's the hardest part. Is we can talk about what boundaries are all day long, but if you don't understand, how to effectively set a boundary, especially with another person, it can feel so gross. It can feel so bad and so hard and difficult and challenging. And human nature is to avoid challenging things. So we're going to avoid it at all costs. So we would rather ruin our energy or deplete ourselves than try to set a boundary with another human, because it's so difficult to do. So I think we were talking about it before we started rolling, and just one thing that I always think about in the back of my head, if I know that I need to set some sort of boundary for myself, whether that's the amount of time I'm spending with a person or the amount of just contact or energy that I'm giving to that relationship, I think it's important to express your expectations for what you need from the other person and what they can expect from you. Because if you can reciprocate that or come to a means in the middle, I think that relationship balance is just so much better.
And I think doing that right from the get-go of the first engagement of contact or outing that you might be doing with somebody, you can be like, yes, I will go. However, I just want to let you know I need to be out by this time. And that's a complete sentence. You don't need to give them the why. You don't need to give them, any explanation on that. And I feel like that as women especially, we feel like we have to be like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, but I can't.
The over-apologizing woman.
And the over-explaining of it. But no is a complete sentence. And I'm sure everybody's heard that before, but there's no need to explain. If it doesn't work for you and you know that this is my limits to what I can do, own it. And it's uncomfortable at first. It is so uncomfortable at first. But the more you begin to do it, the more you will find power within that. The ability to say, to set the expectations that you have. And it's not even the expectations of the other person, it's the expectations of yourself. Like, I'm leaving at this time, and that's just what it is. And I think, like I said, women have a tendency to just feel like, oh, well, I can't do that because so-and-so's going to think something of me. What somebody else thinks of you is none of your business.
Yeah, definitely. I love that saying. It's one of my favorites. But going back to what you said about new relationships, I think it's easier in new relationships.
I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Especially if you don't know the person really well, you can establish those boundaries in the beginning. Like, I'm a busy mom. My bedtime is 8:00, whatever that looks like. I work 40 plus hours a week. The weekends are my sanctuary, whatever your energetic boundary looks like. However, established relationships, that shit is tricky.
That gets blurry. It gets very blurry. And I like what you said about new relationships, because even when you and I first started to brainstorm the idea of this whole UpWell concept and this whole brand that we're building, we were very upfront in our very first sit-down meeting that stated, I'm a blunt person. Don't ever take anything that I say, to heart. If you have a problem, please come to me directly. And we set these expectations right from the get-go. And so now we're able to have such clear communication with one another if we're not feeling something. But the other person then in turn isn't taking it personally. It's not like, oh, they don't like me, they don't want to do it anymore. Never once have I thought that, to where it's like, oh man, I'm gonna offend her, I'm gonna make her mad. It's like, nope, she needs to know that this is where my head's at with it, this is what I'm feeling. And I think, like you said, establishing that right from the get-go is a beautiful thing to really making a solid and really strong foundation with somebody.
Definitely. And I think that people assume that boundaries mean walls or creating like a hard no all the time. And I think when you're learning how to set boundaries, it can be the hardest in your most intimate relationships, like your husband, your boyfriend, the people you spend the most time with, because those lines blur very much so. So give me some ideas maybe of ways that we can establish boundaries in an established relationship, because we evolve, our needs change, our timeline changes, all of those things in our lives.
I think being delicate with your verbiage, and I know that might sound counterintuitive because of what I just said of being very explicit with your verbiage, but I think being delicate with your verbiage in the sense that, honey, I need you to understand that this is nothing personal, but right now I need to be by myself, or I need some alone time, or I really just want to go do this thing on my own. It has, that's just where I'm at energetically right now, and that's what I need in order to be a better partner to you for the rest of the evening, the rest of our time together. You can make that as small or as large of a window as you want, but I think just being delicate with your verbiage in the sense of, I'm not saying this to be hurtful, and coming with it with an authentic voice, not a phony, sing-songy, smiling through your teeth, a little head tilt, just really kind of being raw, being vulnerable, and being like, this is what I need right now, and I just need you to respect that.
Yeah, and I think you just hit the nail on the head with the word respect, because I always think in my mind, respected boundaries equal no resentment. And it's like, if you can establish those boundaries and be clear about your expectations, and communicate that with your partner, what you need from them and what they can expect from you in that moment. And that's going to change. That's subject to change. And I think it's always important to revisit those boundaries that you've set in the past, because they're fluid. It's not a wall. It's a moving piece.
Yeah, relationships evolve.
Yeah, definitely.
You evolve as a person, and your evolution and your partner's evolution are each their own things, but then there's also the evolution of your relationship together. So when one is evolving in a certain way and the other one's evolving in a different way, the evolution of the relationship can then become a little tricky.
The dynamics
at times,
change,
and then it's kind of working through how you maneuver through that.
Yeah, definitely. And I do want to change the subject a little bit, because we talk a lot about boundaries with people and boundaries in relationships, but I do want to talk about boundaries energetically, because that's a big energy suck. And if that makes sense to you, you'll know exactly what I mean, because you can feel depleted at the end of the day, even if you didn't do a lot, even if you weren't around a lot of people or you didn't have a bunch of places to go, you can feel completely drained. So I think recognizing what some of those things are in your life is super important, because that, to me, is a boundary that you can set immediately. It doesn't require communication with anyone else. You can figure out what is draining to you and what gives you energy, and you can start to create clearer boundaries within yourself.
A big one for me is technology.
Huge.
And just knowing that if I'm looking at my phone too much, or I'm looking at a television too much, or I'm looking at my laptop for too long, it's depleting. And nobody has control over your time on that. And I understand some of you might be thinking, oh, well, I have a job where I sit in front of a computer all day. Yes. And I could say something quite harsh in that regard, but I'll keep my comment to myself for the time being. But your personal time, I think, is more what we're talking about. That time that you spend on your phone, just put it down. Put it down. And that's a hard thing for so many people to do. And in past episodes, we've talked about that dopamine hit, but the energetic suck out of you when you spend too much time engaging in technology, that can be hard on your soul.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's not even just the actual technology looking at it. I mean, obviously there's so much science behind blue light, especially late at night, and how it affects your brain waves and how it affects your sleep and your energy levels. But I think the connection that you get, or the consumption part of it, is even worse, because it makes such a big difference depending on what you are consuming, the type of content that you're consuming. If you're always looking at negative things, if you're watching the news, if you're only hearing the worst things that are happening in the entire world, and you're not hearing anything good, because there is good, there is positive. So I think a boundary that you can look at for yourself is, what are you consuming that could be depleting you? Overconsumption is depleting.
Yeah. And even other things that are even much simpler than that. With me personally, I have a sound boundary that I can only take in so much noise. And if I hear too many things, especially if there is a television on, somebody's watching something on their phone, there might be music playing or something happening outside, and it's all of these different sounds coming from so many different directions, I almost feel like I'm going to explode.
Overload.
Inside. It's a sensory overload. And so I know from personal experience that I am very much a silence seeker, which is something I intend to talk about coming up in a few episodes. But just knowing that even like sensory overload, and I think we've become numb to that in a sense, like our visual sense, our audio, there's so many different things that overload us and we don't even realize it.
I agree. And let's talk about how people can avoid this, because I do think, it's nice to listen to us talk about it, but I think some people are probably listening like, yeah, that's nice for you to say, but I've got 3 kids that are in 3 different sports, and I'm here and I'm there, and it's loud and it's noisy, and I'm checking my emails at the game, and all these things. What are some tools, or what are some things that we could do to set in place, maybe to just better use our time, or draw that boundary in how we're spending our energy when we're pulled in so many different directions?
I think one of the biggest things, if you are a person that's in a situation that Sarah just described, not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to ask somebody if it's a kid related thing, asking them, hey, I need 10 minutes. I need 10 minutes right now. Can you help me out? And that can be tough for a lot of people, because I know that there are some people who don't have any family around. They don't have, anything like that. But you don't want to just plop your kids in front of a technology, to take your time. However, I feel like being able to ask for help, whether that's your spouse or a sibling or a parent or a neighbor or your best friend, or there is somebody out there that can help you when you are feeling overloaded.
Yeah, I think support is so, so important in any facet, whether you have children or not, just to have that sense of community and have that sense of just having those people to rely on when you need them. And I know that's kind of opposite of what we're talking about when we're talking about creating boundaries to protect yourself, but you also have to remind yourself to protect your own energy, that sometimes it takes being vulnerable and asking for support. To me, it really comes down to determining what gives you energy and what sucks your energy out, right? Like, what makes you feel good, feel refreshed, feel fulfilled, and what is draining to you. And I know in this society and in this day and age, we don't always have complete control over that, right? Like you're going to come into contact with people that maybe rub you the wrong way, or you're going to be stretched really thin in your schedule for portions of your life. That's going to happen. Work might be busy, your kids might be busy. There's all sorts of things that make it seem impossible to set energetic boundaries or boundaries in certain relationships. So I think just really digging into what fills you up, what brings you energy, what fulfills you, what fills your cup. I think making time for that, is such a huge part of establishing boundaries, because it doesn't have to be building a wall and saying no to everything, which saying no is a big thing, of course. But saying yes to the other things that do fill you up.
I think taking the time to take an inventory on yourself to understand what those things are is crucial. So many of us have a tendency to, again, as women, we said this in the beginning, to kind of put our needs on the back burner, but knowing what your needs are. And I feel like as a society, a lot of women don't even know what it is that they need. And taking the time to really understand that, whether that's through journaling, whether that is through walking in nature, whether that is through sitting or seeing a counselor, or whether that's, movement, working out, yoga, you name it. You can do a lot of introspection to understanding what it is that you need, and what your what your core nurturing wants and needs are. Usually it takes some introspection on that.
Yeah, and I think even just communicating with a girlfriend is a good place to start. If you have a relationship that's strong and you can communicate openly and freely, I think that is a good place to start. You can start to identify those things in yourself and maybe one another that you can have some support into.
I agree. So tell me, how do you know when you need to establish new boundaries, or your boundaries have been crossed, or you feel like you've broken your own boundary?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I go into autopilot mode, and going back to people not having firm boundaries or just kind of going through their day, with unestablished boundaries, whether that is in their relationships or their work-life balance, or just what they do to give themselves energy or put their energy into things. I think once you start to feel, like you have your blinders on in life and you're just kind of going through the motions.
Just ghosting?
Yeah, I think that is a big realization if you can snap out of it and recognize that pattern, that your boundaries are too fluid. They aren't firm enough, and you need to start thinking a little bit more about what that looks like to you.
You become, I think, in a sense, almost numb to when you notice that you aren't having any positive emotions, and a lot of your emotions are negative, whether you're short-tempered, you're annoyed or frustrated, and that is the primary cluster of emotions that you're going to, and there isn't joy, and there isn't happiness, and there isn't laughter, and there isn't excitement. I think that that's when your boundaries are off kilter.
Emotions are always our greatest compass, and I think if you turn them off, or you learn to quiet them, or just you don't listen to your intuition when it comes to a situation or a person or anything like that, I think you lose a little bit of direction.
Yes, and I think one thing that can help reset that, and it's something that works for me very well, is practicing the pause.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So practicing the pause. So it can be something as 10 seconds. It can be something as a couple weeks. It can be something as a couple years. So for me, if I feel like something somebody has said has crossed over a line, I go mute and I just pause for a second. I gather my thoughts and I think, okay, how has this made me feel? Why do I feel this way? What is the best course of action? And then executing that action. And sometimes I can get through that very quickly in a 10-second time frame, and sometimes it takes me a while to where I really need time to think on it before I can revisit it and really establish, okay, this is why I feel this way, and do it in a rational way, because there's nothing worse than being irrational in a situation where you feel like you are being assaulted. And I don't mean that in the physical sense, but I feel like,
your boundary being
yes,
crossed.
Yeah. And so practicing the pause. And so for me, I am one that I have learned I don't need to respond to a text message right away.
That's a great example.
And that's the best example I can give right now is that if somebody texts me and I'm working, I'm driving, I'm reading a book, I'm eating dinner, I'm talking to I'm in a conversation with somebody else via text or something like that, to where, okay, nope, they have to wait. It doesn't mean that they aren't important, but they have to wait because right now, this is where my focus is. This is what I need to be focusing on. And I will get to them when I feel energetically ready to.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest energy suckers, honestly, is the fact that we think we can multitask. We cannot. We are present beings. We are in one situation, in one place. Our bodies are in one place. Our minds need to be with it. And we try to spread ourselves in many different directions, and we just get spread too thin, and that's when your energy spills out. That's when you feel depleted. That's when you feel tired or angry, or all those other emotions that Katie kind of shared in the beginning, because we haven't established that boundary.
Right. And ultimately, everybody in life is always like, I just want to be happy. I'm seeking happiness. Happiness is a state of mind. Happiness is a present emotion, and it is a fleeting emotion, and it needs to be a fleeting emotion so that you understand what it is that truly makes you happy.
Yeah.
And sometimes getting your boundaries crossed is your best lesson in what makes you happy.
Yeah, I agree, because ultimately I feel like in any moment we're seeking freedom, joy, peace, ease, all the emotions that make us feel at home and in the present, in the moment. So I think what you just said is perfect.
Yeah, I agree. All right.
Well, this was a fun one. I hope you guys kind of learned a little bit about, what a boundary is. It doesn't have to be a wall. It doesn't always involve another person. Sometimes it's just setting those boundaries, those energetic boundaries in your own life, whether that is with how you spend your time or who you're spending your time with, what is draining to you and what is fulfilling to you, just establishing those things and recognizing them so that you can feel present and joyful in the moment.
Yeah, and being strong and really being confident in who you are. That is key with understanding what your boundaries are, and that takes some work. Like I said, you gotta do a little bit of work with that to really understand what it is that you want and who you truly are.
100%.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us on another episode of UpWell The Podcast. I'm Katie. This is Sarah. You can find us at UpWell The Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find me at barefoot.katie and Sarah at Sarah Barretts. So until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and the world around you. Bye.
Bye.